Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for holding this hearing. I can't tell you how much your words of support have meant to Senator Schumer and I and all of our colleagues who've been affected by Superstorm Sandy. I'm very grateful for the very productive conversations we've had with Governor Cuomo, with the delegation, with our appropriators, along with our leaders. I just want to thank you for being so thoughtful and helpful in trying to create the best momentum possible for the recovery that our families need. Particularly, I know that as you suffered through Hurricane Katrina and the enormous work you had to do to begin to rebuild New Orleans and other surrounding areas, your advocacy during that time was extraordinary. And I really appreciated when you said that you would stand by us in the way that New York stood by you during that difficult time. That was extremely kind. I also want to talk a little bit about how this storm is affecting our families and what kind of recovery it's actually taking to rebuild. Obviously, millions of people's lives have been affected. More than 40 New Yorkers have died, and millions were left with significant damages to their homes, neighborhoods, businesses, and families. One story is of a man, Pedro Correa from Staten Island. Now, Pedro is a lifelong New Yorker. When he saw the Twin Towers fall, he determined that he had to protect our nation, and he entered the service. He went to Iraq. He's now a security guard at Sing Sing Prison. He and his wife are raising their kids on Staten Island. They have 2 children, ages 2 and 6. Now, as the hurricane approached and the superstorm hit, Pedro directed his family to leave the home, to seek higher ground, to seek safety. He stayed in the home because he had just remodeled it himself, and he wanted to make sure he could protect it. But the flood waters rose, and he became so frightened he thought he wouldn't survive that night, and he called his family to say goodbye to them. As the storm waters rose, he was able to swim with a broken rib to a neighbor's house, and he actually survived. Despite that harrowing time and that difficulty, he's now not receiving the aid he actually needs to rebuild that home. He's been able to file insurance claims. That was capped. It was capped at less than half of the value of his home. He sent in his FEMA claim. FEMA offered only $2,800. So you can imagine he doesn't have any choices right now. His only choice actually is to declare bankruptcy if he's able to rebuild his home. And this is a man who lived through the terrors of 9/11, represented our nation in Iraq with courage and dignity, and now he's fighting for his own life just to save his family and his home. And these are stories that you've heard so many times, Senator, in your own state and in your own committee. And I just want to thank you for understanding how important this is and letting my colleagues and I all testify. So what we now have to do is begin to rebuild our state. We've been hit very hard across the Hudson Valley, across Long Island, all across the 5 boroughs. As you know, families' homes are destroyed and their businesses are in rubble. But New Yorkers are tough, just like folks from your state. They certainly can get knocked down, but they get back up every single time. And I think that what we have to do is begin to focus on how we give them the tools they need to do this. Now, what we know so far, we have over 300,000 homes seriously damaged, more than 265,000 businesses impacted. About 238,000 have filed their FEMA claims to date, and thousands of New Yorkers are still homeless. We've estimated our damages are upwards of $32.8 billion. And this was a conservative estimate. This was an estimate based only on the damage that had been reported to date. So only on the number of people who have been able to file those FEMA claims, who have been able to file their insurance claims, able to file flood insurance. And these were very conservative numbers, so we do not believe this is even the extent of the damage that New York will have to repay. We have a couple photos that have been shown. This one here is Breezy Point. As you heard with Breezy Point, a whole neighborhood was razed by fire. There's absolutely not a house standing in that neighborhood. It will take enormous effort to get that up and running. This is a photo to show the power of the storm, a boat in the middle of someone's yard, a house destroyed from just crushed through the lower 2 floors. So you can see we have one of firefighters who are in Lower Manhattan. You could see the height of the floodwaters. We've talked about the number of tunnels that were actually flooded. And the problem with salt water is when it gets into tunnels and gets into subway systems, it can destroy the electrical systems. And so the rebuilding takes an enormous amount of investment. Many of our bridges and tunnels were destroyed. And then our last photo is just the region that I want to show you to show how much land area was deeply affected. Obviously, the purple area is what received the height of the storm, received the most damage. The red areas were also significantly affected. But you can see how vast this storm was, and it really crushed areas that had a very high density of populations. And that's why the cost for rebuilding is so extraordinary. But I do want to thank you again for holding this hearing. I want to recognize how important your leadership is here, and I want to ask you on behalf of New Yorkers to please meet the needs of our ability to rebuild.